$78. That was all Sofia Hartley had left in the world when Emma's school fees were due in 3 days. The clock above the diner's counter read 3:22 in the morning. December cold seeped through the cracked windows like a slow poison, turning the air thick and grey. Sofia stood behind the counter, her fingers numb, counting the same crumpled bills for the third time. $1. $2. $5. Tens. She knew the total before she finished. She always knew. $78 stood between her daughter and the streets. The heating bill had been disconnected 6 weeks ago. The electric company had sent 2 notices. 3. The third one had arrived in an envelope the color of a bruise, and Sofia had opened it alone in the bathroom, her hand pressed against her mouth so Emma would not hear her cry. But $78 was not enough for school fees. $78 was not enough for heat. $78 was not enough for anything that mattered. She folded the bills into a line on the counter, arranging them by denomination like a prayer with no one listening. The diner hummed around her, fluorescent lights casting everything in a color that was not quite white and not quite yellow. Outside, the Los Angeles winter pressed against the glass. No snow. Just cold and darkness that seemed to have weight. The espresso machine hissed behind her. 4 a.m. approaches. The kitchen crew would arrive soon, and she would move into the breakfast rush, and she would smile at every table, and she would hope that someone left a tip generous enough to bridge the distance between survival and catastrophe. That was the mathematics of her life now. Always calculating. Always counting. Always coming up short. She did not hear the door open. She did not hear the gunshot at first. Her brain could not process the sound. It was too loud, too raw, too wrong for a Thursday night in a diner where the worst thing that usually happened was burnt toast and tired waitresses. The sound split the air like a blade through silk. Giovanni Castelliano sat alone in the corner booth, as he had every Thursday night for the past 4 months. Black suit. White shirt unbuttoned at the collar. Gold watch catching the fluorescent light. He was 6'2", broad-shouldered, with dark hair silvered at the temples and eyes like storm clouds gathering before a hurricane. A scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, pale white against olive skin. He was the kind of man who made the air around him feel dangerous just by existing in it. He had been drinking coffee. Black. No sugar. No cream. Just the coffee, and his phone, and the particular stillness of someone who has learned to be comfortable with his own silence. The bullet found his shoulder and spun him sideways. Blood spread across his white shirt like a blooming rose, dark and wet and impossibly fast. His body went rigid. For a moment, just a moment, no one moved. Douglas Hale stood in the doorway with the gun still raised. Wild-eyed. Trembling. Sofia knew that face. She had memorized every angle of it 8 years ago when he first decided that she belonged to him. She had learned to read the rage in his jaw, the violence in his fists. The scars on her back mapped the geography of his love in a language only pain could speak. Enzo and Sal stood frozen. Giovanni's lieutenants. Both wore suits that cost more than Sofia earned in a month. Both had hands on their weapons, but their reflexes had betrayed them. There was confusion in their eyes. This did not happen. This was not allowed to happen. Not to him. Not to their boss. Sofia moved without thinking. She did not decide. Her body simply responded, like water flowing downhill, like instinct that lived deeper than thought. She vaulted over the counter, her threadbare coat flaring, her worn shoes slipping slightly on the polished floor. She ran to him. Giovanni's eyes were already closing. His breathing had turned shallow. She pressed her palms against the wound, and the blood was hot, so hot, and slick against her skin. It pulsed with the rhythm of his heart. Slow. Too slow. Call 911, she said. Her voice did not sound like her voice. It sounded like someone who had never been afraid, someone who knew exactly what to do. Now. She tilted his head back, opened his airway, and began CPR. Her hand shook not from fear. Her hand shook because she had not eaten in 2 days. She had given her food to Emma. The hunger lived in her muscles now, in the tremor of her palms against his chest, in the way her vision swam slightly at the edges. 1 compression. 2. 3. The sound of his ribs shifting under her hands. She did not think about what she was doing. She did not think about the man with the gun, about Enzo and Sal finally moving, about the sirens that were beginning somewhere far away in the Los Angeles night. She thought only about the rhythm. Only about the counting. 78. 79. 80. His eyes flickered open for a fraction of a second. Dark eyes. Intelligent eyes. Eyes that had seen things that most people could not imagine. They locked onto hers, and in that moment, something passed between them that neither of them would ever fully understand. The sirens grew louder. Enzo had fired at Douglas, and Douglas had collapsed into the doorway, bleeding but conscious, his gun skittering across the floor. More sirens. Red and blue lights painted the windows. The world was breaking apart into fragments. But what she did not know, what could not possibly have occurred to her in that moment, was that saving Giovanni Castelliano's life would unravel everything she had worked so carefully to hide. It would expose secrets that she had locked away so deeply that she had almost forgotten they existed. It would set in motion a chain of events that would fundamentally alter the architecture of her world. She kept her palms pressed against his chest. She kept counting. 85. 86. 87. The paramedics pushed through the door. They pushed her aside. They took over, their movements efficient and practiced, their voices clipped and professional. She stumbled backward, her hands covered in his blood, a threadbare coat torn at the shoulder. She could feel the cold now. The terrible cold. It was seeping into her bones. Enzo looked at her. Really looked at her. In 15 years of working for Giovanni Castelliano, Marco had never seen this. He had never seen his boss locked in the eyes of a young woman while his life drained into her hands. He had never seen this kind of moment, and he did not know what it meant, but he knew that it meant something. "What is your name?" he asked her. His voice was quiet. "Sofia," she said. Sofia Hartley. He did not forget it. He would never forget it. Now, let us go back to the beginning. Let us understand how Sofia Hartley ended up in that diner at 3:22 in the morning with $78 in her pocket and a lifetime of secrets wrapped around her like chains. 3 weeks before the blood and the sirens, before the diner became a crime scene, Sofia Hartley stood in front of her bathroom mirror at 5:47 in the morning with her shirt pulled up to her shoulders. The light was thin and gray, filtering through a window so small it barely counted as a window. She traced the scars on her back with her fingertips, old ones, faded to white like rivers on a map nobody should ever have to read. There were 7 of them that she could see. 7 distinct lines where Douglas Hale's belt had connected with her skin years ago, back when she still believed that love meant enduring pain without speaking its name aloud. She pulled her shirt down. The waitress uniform came next, black pants, white button-up, the fabric so thin it was almost transparent. She had owned this uniform for 3 years. It hung from her frame like a sad flag. Her daughter Emma was still sleeping in the corner of the apartment's only bedroom, tucked under a blanket that had been patched 17 times with mismatched fabric. The mattress sat directly on the floor because there was no frame, no bed skirt, no pretense of comfort. Emma was 5 years old and had never complained about this. Sofia moved through the kitchen, 2 steps across the tile floor, past the refrigerator that hummed like a dying animal. She opened a cabinet and counted coins into a ceramic bowl that had belonged to her mother. $4.32. This was breakfast. Oatmeal and milk, divided into 2 portions. Emma would eat the larger one. Sofia would pretend to be full. She had learned not to feel hunger. She had learned to recognize the feeling and then release it, like it was a bird trapped in her chest that she could coax toward the window and let fly away. The walk to the diner took 43 minutes. Sophia knew this because she had timed it weeks ago, calculating whether bus fare would be better than the damage her shoes were taking. The shoes had holes in the soles now, actual holes you could see through if you looked at the bottom. They had cost $8 at a thrift store on Figueroa Street, and they were falling apart. She did not have $8 anymore. Los Angeles in December was cold in a way people who did not live in poverty never understood. It was not the cold that killed you. It was the cold that stole your warmth slowly, like an invisible theft, so that by the time you realized you were shivering, your body had already given up some essential thing it would never get back. She passed the mansions on Wilshire Boulevard, enormous houses with gates you could not see through, guarded by security cameras and men in dark suits who stood motionless in the fog. These men did not see her. She was the kind of person their eyes slid past without catching, like she was made of glass. One of those mansions belonged to Giovanni Castellano. She did not know this yet. The diner opened at 6 a.m. Sophia was always there by 6:55, tying her apron, checking the coffee stations, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned long ago that every second wasted was a second she was not earning money. Mr. Chen, the owner, was a man of 62 with gray hair and a limp from a construction accident decades ago. He moved slower than his waitresses. He looked at Sophia and said, "You look thin again. You eating?" "I'm fine, Mr. Chen," she said. "Just busy with Emma." This was a lie. She was not busy. She was hungry. But Mr. Chen had a family to feed, and the diner was struggling. The margins were thin. She would not ask him for anything. The morning rush came at 7. Teachers heading to schools, construction workers, nurses coming off night shifts, all of them moving like exhausted animals through the door, wanting coffee and eggs and something solid in their stomachs before the day tried to break them. Sophia moved between the tables like a ghost, quiet, efficient, her feet aching by 8 a.m., her smile fixed to her face like a picture taped to cardboard. A man at table 7 left a $2 tip on a $20 meal. Sophia pocketed the money. That was her and Emma's dinner. Ramen noodles. Maybe an apple if the store had them on sale. The afternoon shift was worse because it was slower. Slower meant less money. Less money meant the gap between what she had and what she needed grew wider every single day, like a canyon opening in her chest. At 3 p.m., Mr. Chen handed her an envelope. "This came for you," he said. His voice had changed. It was quieter, sadder. The envelope was thick and cream-colored and official. She opened it with her fingers. The letter was from Emma's private school. Elite Academy. A place where Emma had scored in the top 1% of her kindergarten class, where she had been given a scholarship worth 80% of tuition because the teachers said she was special, extraordinary, a child with a mind that could change the world if given the right tools. The letter said that the scholarship was being restructured. The remaining 20% of tuition, $125,000, was now due within 30 days instead of 90 days. This was because new management had taken over. New management had new policies. Sophia sat down on one of the stools at the counter. $125,000. The number was so large it did not feel real. It felt like something from a different universe, a different planet, a different order of magnitude entirely. She had $78 to her name. In her checking account. In her purse. In the jar under her bed. $78 total. She went into the bathroom. The bathroom stall at the diner was the only place where she could be alone. She sat on the closed toilet and counted her tips from that day. $42. Not enough for rent next week. Not enough for the heating bill that had already been disconnected from her apartment. Not enough for anything. Emma's school fees were due in 3 weeks. Douglas Hale appeared at midnight. Sophia was closing, mopping the floor with a mop that had seen better years, when she saw him through the glass door. He was standing across the street under a streetlight. He was tall, 6'2", with shoulders that had gotten broader since she had last seen him, like he had been spending time in a gym somewhere, building muscle where there had already been rage. He was smiling. He waved at her like she was a friend, like they had arranged to meet here, like he had every right to be there. Sofia froze. The mop handle went still in her hands. Douglas pressed his face against the glass. "Sofia, I've been looking for you. We need to talk about Emma." The words came through the door like bullets. She could see his breath fogging the glass. She could see the way his eyes were moving, cataloguing the diner, the layout, the exits, the way a predator catalogued terrain. She moved toward the door and locked it. Her hands were shaking. "You can't hide forever," he called. His voice was muffled now but still clear. "I know where you work now. I know where Emma goes to school. I know everything." Sofia ran to the back room and found Mr. Chen. His face went pale when she told him. He called the police while she stood there, and the police took 47 minutes to arrive. 2 officers, a man and a woman, both looking tired. They went outside and talked to Douglas for what Sofia knew was that she was alone. That the law had looked at her and decided she was not worth protecting. That the father of her child now knew exactly where to find her. She finished closing the diner. She locked the back door. She stepped out onto the street and began the 43-minute walk home through the December cold, glancing over her shoulder every few steps, feeling the weight of being hunted settle onto her shoulders like a coat made of ice. 3:22 in the morning. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and grease, the kind of smell that sinks into your skin after 12 hours of standing on aching feet. Sofia Hartley wiped down the counter for the 1,000th time that night, her fingers numb, her lower back screaming. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like dying insects. Outside, December wind clawed at the windows. She should have left at midnight. Her shift ended at midnight. But a businessman had ordered eggs at 11:45, and she needed every tip, every single dollar, so she stayed. Now the diner was nearly empty. Just an old man in booth 3 reading a newspaper he'd read 3 times already, and in the corner booth, a man she did not recognize. He sat absolutely still. Expensive suit, black, tailored so perfectly it looked like it had been painted onto his broad shoulders. His white shirt was open at the collar, revealing a chest marked by time and something harder than time. His hair was dark, silvered at the temples. His left hand rested on the table, and on his ring finger was a gold band so thick it caught the diner light and threw it back like a weapon. Giovanni Castelliano could not sleep. He had not slept properly in 4 days. His bedroom in the mansion was too quiet, or perhaps it was too loud, the silence of a man who had built an empire on the screams of others, now forced to listen to nothing but the sound of his own breathing. Nightmares came when he closed his eyes. His father's hands. His father's voice, that growled like an animal cornered and starving. 10 years old, curled in the back seat of a car, bones jutting through skin, watching his father's silhouette in the front seat smoking cigarettes and planning something violent. His mother was dead by then. Dead for 6 months. He remembered the funeral. He remembered being hungry during the funeral. He had sworn then, with the certainty of a child who understands nothing but desperation, that he would never let another child suffer like that. Never. Not if he built an empire to prevent it. Not if he had to break every law in the state to ensure it. Giovanni ordered black coffee. No sugar. No cream. Just black, like penance. The waitress brought it, and he saw her hand shake slightly as she set down the cup. Saw the tremor that came from hunger, not fear. He recognized it because he had lived in those hands once. Her name tag said Sofia. She moved with the practiced grace of someone who had learned not to waste energy on unnecessary movements. Her uniform was clean but worn through at the seams, and her shoes had been resoled at least 3 times. You could see the visible stitching where professional repair work had been attempted on a minimum wage budget. She was perhaps 29, but her eyes held the exhaustion of someone twice that age. Giovanni watched her. This was not unusual. He was a man who watched. He watched his enemies, his friends, his lieutenants, looking for the fracture points where pressure could be applied. But this was different. This was a man watching a woman work herself into invisibility. At 3:19, Douglas Hale kicked open the diner door. He was drunk. Not the soft, slurring drunk of someone who had drunk socially. This was the aggressive, hard-edged drunk of someone medicating rage. His jacket was open despite the December cold. His hair stuck up in chaotic directions. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had decided the world owed him violence. Sofia froze. "You think you can just leave me?" Douglas's voice cracked like a whip across the diner. His hand came up, and in it was a gun, small and vicious and absolutely real. "You think you can take my daughter and just disappear?" Sofia's hands rose slowly. "Douglas, please. I know where you work now. I know where that bastard lives. I know everything, Sofia. You can't hide from me." Giovanni stood up from the booth. Not quickly. Not with fear. With the kind of deliberate movement that had been forged in violence and refined by decades of absolute authority. He stepped directly into the line of fire. The gun went off. The sound was not like the movies. It was sharper, uglier, a crack of thunder that shattered the fluorescent hum into silence. The bullet punched through soft tissue, through bone, and Giovanni Castelliano fell like a man who had been waiting for permission to stop standing. Enzo and Sal drew weapons from inside their jackets, but the angles were wrong, all wrong. Sofia was there, on the ground, dropping to her knees beside the bleeding man. Douglas ran. He screamed something as he fled, something about killing everyone, but nobody heard him clearly. The diner had become a vacuum of sound, nothing but breathing and the slow drip of blood onto checkered tile. Sofia's hands moved with muscle memory learned in a CPR class 7 years ago, before Emma was born, when she still believed in being prepared for emergencies. She ripped her apron away and pressed it against the wound in his shoulder. Blood bloomed through the fabric like a flower growing in fast motion. "Stay with me," she whispered, and her voice was not trembling anymore. Fear had burned away, replaced by pure necessity. "Stay with me. You're going to be okay." Giovanni's eyes opened. They focused on her face, on the fierce concentration there, on the trembling in her jaw that came from determination, not panic. He saw her hunger-thin arms working, saw the way her fingers pressed against the wound with absolute precision. "Breathing," she said to no one. Then, to him, "Just keep breathing." Enzo was on his phone. "Ambulance. Now. Downtown diner on 5th. Boss is down." Sal knelt beside them. "How long?" Sofia did not answer. She was counting seconds in her head, applying pressure, checking the wound, all the things that kept a man alive when he had been opened by bullets. Her apron was soaked now. Blood had gotten under her fingernails. Her lips were moving, forming words, some kind of prayer or spell or just the desperate whisper of someone keeping death at bay through sheer force of will. The ambulance arrived in 7 minutes and 34 seconds. Sofia knew because she counted every one. The paramedics pushed her aside with professional urgency. One of them, a woman with tired eyes, looked at Sofia as they prepared the stretcher. "You stopped the bleeding." 2 more minutes and he would have bled out. Giovanni's hand reached out as they lifted him. It found Sofia's wrist and held it with surprising strength. His voice was barely audible. "Your name?" "Sofia. Sofia Hartley." He nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement, and then they were taking him away, out into the December night, sirens wailing into the cold. Enzo stayed behind. He watched Sofia stand there, shaking, covered in blood that was not hers. He watched her stare at her own hands like they belonged to a stranger. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. "Boss, she saved your life. We need to find out who she is." Giovanni, in the ambulance, pressed the paramedic's hand aside for just a moment. "Her name is Sofia Hartley. Find out everything. Everything." He closed his eyes and saw his childhood again, not the diner, not the blood, but the car. The hunger. The small boy who had decided that if he ever survived this, no child would know that suffering. He whispered into the oxygen mask, "I will fix this. Whatever she needs, I will fix it." The ambulance carried him toward the hospital. Behind it, the diner lights hummed. Sofia stood alone in the fluorescent glow, her apron on the floor, her hands shaking, not understanding that her life had already begun to change. Sofia stood in the darkness of her apartment, staring at the shattered photograph frame on the floor. Glass glittered like broken teeth across the linoleum. The image inside, her late husband, Marcus, smiling in his navy uniform, lay face down in the debris. His photograph had survived 3 years of her running, 3 years of hiding, 3 years of Douglas hunting her through the city like she was prey. Tonight, he had finally found her. She could still feel his hands on her throat. The pressure. The way her vision had darkened at the edges like a photograph burning inward. She could still hear his voice, thick with alcohol and rage. "Diana already has the paperwork ready. I'm taking Emma." Sofia's legs gave out. She sank to the kitchen floor, surrounded by the wreckage of the only image she had left of Marcus. Her fingers trembled as she gathered the pieces, careful not to cut herself further, though blood was already dripping from her palm where the glass had bitten deep. Each shard she collected felt like collecting pieces of hope she would never reassemble. The apartment was so quiet you could hear her breathing, shallow, panicked, like a wounded animal backing into a corner with nowhere left to run. 1 hour later, Sofia climbed the stairs to the roof of her building. The December night had turned vicious. A blizzard had swept into Los Angeles with the kind of anger that meteorologists could not explain, wind screaming down from the mountains with temperatures plummeting toward freezing. Snow, actual snow, impossible snow, fell thick and heavy on a city that had never learned to expect it. The wind tore through her thin coat like a blade wrapped in ice. Sofia walked to the edge. The snow had already accumulated 3 inches on the concrete, soft and white and utterly indifferent to her existence. Below, the city lights blurred and faded. The streets were empty. At 2 in the morning, Los Angeles slept, and Sofia stood alone at the rim of the world. She clutched the broken photograph frame. The glass cut her palm again, deeper this time. Blood dripped onto the white snow, small dark circles spreading outward like accusation. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered to the wind. The words were barely audible, consumed by the blizzard. "I can't protect Emma. Douglas has money. He has Diana Whitfield. He has judges and lawyers and a system that was built to believe men like him. What do I have? What have I ever had?" Her toes moved closer to the edge. The snow was so cold it burned. "Maybe he's right," Sofia said, and her voice cracked like something breaking inside her chest. "Maybe I am nothing. Maybe Emma would be better off without me. Maybe the kindest thing I could do is just stop." The wind howled. The snow fell. Her foot touched the concrete lip of the roof. Then her phone buzzed. Sofia froze. She pulled the phone from her pocket with shaking fingers. A text message. From Emma, sent from Mrs. Chen's phone next door. "Mommy, when are you coming home? I made you a drawing. It's you and me and Mr. Giovanni eating spaghetti. I love you." Sofia's knees buckled. She collapsed into the snow, the broken frame falling from her hand. Her sobs came in waves, her entire body convulsing with tears she thought she had cried out years ago on a Greyhound bus, tears she thought had dried up and blown away like dust. She read the message again. And again. Each time, Emma's words hit her like a lifeline thrown into dark water. 30 minutes later, Giovanni's black SUV pulled up to her building. He emerged alone, a man 6'3", broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal coat that cost more than her annual salary. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, and they were burning with something that looked like fury. Sofia stumbled out of the building, half frozen, her feet barely working. Giovanni wrapped his own coat around her shoulders without a word and guided her into the back seat. "Tell me everything," he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, but underneath it ran something dangerous, like a current beneath still water. Every threat. Every scar. Sofia hesitated. Then, with shaking hands, she removed her coat. She lifted her shirt, turned her back to him. Enzo and Sal, sitting in the front seat, went absolutely rigid. "How long?" Giovanni asked. 8 years, Sofia whispered. "I left when Emma was born. He found me again 3 months ago." Giovanni's face transformed. The careful composure dissolved. What remained was something older, something that had learned to survive in a world built on violence. His voice barely controlled, not anymore. That night, he made 2 telephone calls. The first was to his contact at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a woman named Agent Teresa Martinez who had been trying to build a case against Diana Whitfield for 18 months. Giovanni gave her everything: dates, amounts, the recordings he had obtained from his own sources, the paper trail that connected every bribe, every suppressed police report, every single transaction that proved Diana Whitfield was not a public servant but a criminal wearing a suit and a smile. The second call was to Vincenzo Moretti, head of the Moretti family, Giovanni's rival in every territory that mattered. But on this night, Giovanni called in a debt that had existed between them for 7 years, a debt owed from a time when Giovanni had looked the other way while Moretti moved product through his territory. The debt was simple: Douglas Hale needed to disappear. "He's mine," Giovanni said quietly. "When you're done with him, I don't want to hear about him ever again." Moretti agreed. 3 nights later, at 2 in the morning, 12 men in black suits moved like ghosts through the parking lot of a dive bar in Boyle Heights. Douglas Hale was stumbling toward his car, drunk and confident, when the darkness itself seemed to crystallize into human form around him. They moved in formation, silent, precise, each man knowing his role without needing to speak. Douglas saw them and pulled a gun from his jacket, a pathetic gesture, desperate and doomed. Before he could aim, the weapon was slapped from his hand with such force that his wrist shattered. He heard the bones break before he felt the pain. "Do you know who I am?" he screamed. "Do you know who protects me?" The lead soldier, a man with a scar running from his left eyebrow to his jaw, smiled without humor. "We know exactly who you are, Douglas Hale." Giovanni Castelliano sends his regards. Douglas's face drained white. He dropped to his knees. Please, I'll leave her alone. I'll disappear. I'll never come back." "You're right about that," the soldier said. Douglas Hale was dragged into a trunk, his screams echoing through empty streets. The machinery of organized crime closed around him like a fist. He was handed to the Moretti family for crimes against their interests, a fabricated debt, but a debt nonetheless, one that could never be paid. He would spend the next 15 years moving through safe houses in Mexico, Eastern Europe, anywhere far enough away that the networks of both families could not find him. He would eventually be found, but not for a very long time. Meanwhile, in her home in the Los Feliz Hills, Diana Whitfield was sleeping her untroubled sleep when federal agents arrived at dawn. They came in force: 6 agents, 2 investigators, and a warrant that had been signed by a federal judge 3 hours earlier. Agent Teresa Martinez herself was leading the operation, and she was smiling. Diana answered the door in her silk robe, her face arranged in practiced confusion. She tried charm first. "Is there some mistake?" "No mistake," Agent Martinez said. She held up a folder thick with documents. "We have bank transfers. We have recordings of conversations between you and Douglas Hale discussing payment amounts. We have suppressed police reports with your signature. We have a witness willing to testify that you accepted bribes in exchange for keeping your ex-boyfriend out of the criminal justice system." "You can't prove any of this," Diana said, but her voice was shaking. "We don't have to prove anything," Martinez replied. "We already have." Diana Whitfield was arrested at 6:17 in the morning. She was walked out of her house in handcuffs, her silk robe torn, her makeup smeared, while news cameras flashed in the cold December dawn. Federal charges were filed immediately: bribery, corruption, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. The evidence was overwhelming and public. Every news outlet in Los Angeles ran the story by 8 in the morning. Her political career, 15 years of careful image management, of cocktail parties and strategic alliances, evaporated in 6 hours. By noon, her political allies had issued statements distancing themselves. By evening, the first civil suits had been filed. By the end of the week, she had been offered a plea deal, 40 years in federal prison in exchange for testimony against other corrupt officials. Her face, once smiling from billboards and campaign materials, was replaced by a mugshot that would follow her for the rest of her life. Her name became synonymous with corruption. Her house was seized. Her bank accounts were frozen. Everything she had built was systematically dismantled, piece by piece, until nothing remained but the hollow shell of a woman who had chosen the wrong side of history. Justice, Giovanni understood, was not death. Death would have been too quick, too easy, too merciful. Justice was erasure. Justice was watching everything you had built crumble to dust while the world watched and judged. It was the kind of justice that left scars that would never heal. 3 months had passed since the federal agents led Diana Whitfield away in handcuffs. 3 months since Douglas Hale vanished into the machinery of organized crime, screaming into a car trunk that sealed shut with the finality of a grave. The December cold had broken into spring, and Los Angeles bloomed with the kind of light that made people forget what darkness looked like. Sofia Hartley stood in the kitchen of Giovanni Castellano's mansion, her hand steady as she diced fresh basil for the pasta she was preparing. Not for him alone. For his staff. For the people who worked in his household. She was no longer a waitress surviving on tips that never came. She was his personal chef, a position that had expanded into something neither of them had anticipated, a woman who managed the household with quiet authority, who earned a salary deposited directly into a bank account that bore her name alone, who came home to an apartment she had chosen and could afford. The apartment was modest. 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors she had cleaned herself, windows that faced a courtyard where Emma played with other children whose parents worked nearby. Sofia had painted the walls a soft yellow. She had hung curtains she had sewn herself during late nights when sleep would not come. The place smelled like her, like lavender soap and the coffee she drank at 5 in the morning before heading to work. Emma thrived there. The girl had gained weight. Her ribs no longer pressed against her skin like a map of starvation. She attended a private school that Giovanni had offered to pay for, but Sofia had insisted on working 3 extra shifts to cover the tuition herself. The girl's teacher had called last week to tell Sofia that Emma had scored in the 99th percentile on her reading assessment. Emma wanted to be a veterinarian now. She talked about it constantly, with the kind of certainty that only children possess. Sofia had also started night classes in business management at Los Angeles City College. She attended on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, after her work in the mansion was finished. She studied in the library until closing time, then took the bus home, her textbooks heavy against her chest. She was rebuilding not just her life, but a version of herself she had never known existed, a woman with ambition, with plans that extended beyond the next day's survival. Giovanni watched her from a distance still, but it was different now. Not the gaze of a savior observing his handiwork. Not the intensity of a man who had orchestrated someone's rescue. He watched her with something closer to reverence. He watched her stand. He watched her not need him. On a Wednesday evening in late April, Sofia arrived at the mansion for her shift to find Giovanni sitting at the kitchen table, a rare occurrence. The Mafia boss did not sit in kitchens. He sat in studies behind mahogany desks or in the back rooms of restaurants where no one could photograph him. But here he was, dressed in a charcoal suit with the top button undone, his silver cufflinks catching the late afternoon light that poured through the windows. "You don't have to work tonight," Giovanni said as Sofia set down her bag. His voice was careful, as though he were speaking to something fragile. "You've earned enough time to rest." Sofia moved to the refrigerator without responding. She pulled out chicken, fresh vegetables, cream. Her movements were efficient and practiced. "I want to work," she said quietly. "I like cooking for you." "Why?" The question hung in the space between them. Sofia set down her ingredients. She turned to face him, met his eyes directly. She had never done this before, held his gaze without flinching, without the automatic submission that poverty and abuse had beaten into her bones. "Because you never treated me like I was broken," she said. "You gave me a job, not charity. You protected Emma without making me feel weak. She paused, searching for the words. "You saw me when I was invisible." Giovanni stood. He walked toward her, his footsteps deliberate and unhurried. When he reached her, he did not touch her. He simply stood there, looking at her face as though trying to memorize something. "You were never invisible," he said. "Not to me." The silence that followed was charged with something neither of them had language for. Sofia turned back to her cooking. Giovanni withdrew to his study, but something had shifted in the space between them, like a door opening just slightly. Over the following weeks, small gestures accumulated like snowfall, each one insignificant until suddenly there was enough to change the landscape. Giovanni brought Emma art supplies and taught her to play chess. He never mentioned the cost of the supplies. He never asked for gratitude. He simply appeared in Sofia's apartment on Saturday mornings with a small box and said, "I thought Emma might like these," and then sat at the kitchen table while the girl showed him her drawings. Sofia watched this happen. She watched Emma, who had known only men as threats, begin to trust this one. She investigated his past the way a woman investigates a stranger who holds her daughter's hand. Sal told her one night, his voice breaking as he spoke. "Boss grew up in hell," Sal said. They were in the mansion's kitchen, and Sal was nursing a coffee that Sofia had made for him. His father beat him daily. Every single day. They lived in a car for 2 years when he was a kid. Maybe 3. He built this empire from nothing and swore no child would suffer like he did. Sal looked away, embarrassed by the emotion crossing his face. "When he followed you home that first night and saw you in that blizzard carrying groceries that weighed more than your body," Sal's voice cracked. "He called me crying. Giovanni Castelliano, the man who makes city officials tremble, crying in his car because you reminded him of his own mother. She died protecting him. She took a beating that was meant for him. She died in his arms." Sofia sat down slowly. She processed this information the way the earth processes rain, absorbing it, letting it change the soil beneath. 1 week later, late on a Wednesday night, Sofia found Giovanni in his study. The city sprawled below the floor-to-ceiling windows, millions of lights scattered across the darkness like stars that had fallen to earth. She had brought him tea, though she knew he would not drink it. She had brought him an excuse to speak. "Sal told me about your father," Sofia said. Giovanni looked up from the papers on his desk. For a moment, something guarded crossed his face. "What did he tell you?" "That you grew up like I did," Sofia said. "Fists and fear and never enough food. Then you understand why I had to help you." It was not a question. It was a statement of logic. "I understand why you couldn't look away," Sofia said. She sat across from him, her posture straight, her voice steady. "But I need you to know something. I need you to hear this." Giovanni waited. "I'm not your second chance," Sofia continued. "I'm not your redemption. I'm not a project you're fixing or a debt you're repaying. I'm not a way for you to save the mother who died protecting you." Something flickered across Giovanni's face: pain, recognition, truth. "I'm my own person," Sofia said. "I rebuilt my life. I stand on my own now. I have an apartment I chose. I have a job I earned. I have savings. Emma is thriving because I made that happen. Me. Not you. And if you love me," she paused. "If you love me, you need to love who I am now. Not who I was. Not who I could have been if you hadn't found me. But who I chose to become." Giovanni sat back in his chair. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I know," he said. "You know what?" "All of it," Giovanni said. "I know you're not my redemption. I know you rebuilt your life. I know you stand on your own. That's why," he stopped himself. That's why what? Sofia asked. That's why I love you, Giovanni said. Not because I saved you, but because you saved yourself. And somehow, in the process, you saved me too. Rain began to fall outside the windows, soft at first, then harder, streaming down the glass like tears. Sofia stood. She crossed the space between them and took his hand. His palm was warm, calloused from a life that had never been easy despite the empire he had built. I love you too, she said. But I need more than words. What do you need? Giovanni asked. I need you to understand that this, us, has to be a choice we make as equals. Not a rescue. Not a transaction. A choice. Giovanni rose. He took her face gently in his hands, the way he had learned to touch delicate things. I choose you, he said. Every day. As an equal. As a woman who stands beside me, not behind me. As someone who sees me clearly and loves me anyway. He kissed her then, and it was not desperate or triumphant. It was certain. When they pulled apart, Sofia was crying. Not from sadness, but from the strange ache of being truly seen by another person. Giovanni held her while the rain fell, and neither of them spoke because language would have diminished what was happening in the silence. Outside, the city continued its endless motion. The machinery of organized crime rumbled on, but within the marble walls of his mansion, a Mafia boss and a waitress who had saved his life stood together as equals, neither rescuing the other, both choosing to stay. The rain fell harder, and Sofia thought of that December night when she had been invisible, when she had counted $78 and knew it was not enough. She thought of how one moment, one decision, one act of courage could remake a life entirely. Sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. This story teaches us that even in the darkest moments, love finds a way. If you believe that, hit like and subscribe. Leave a comment and tell us how this story made you feel. Thank you for staying with us until the very end.